Jesus said to his disciples, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and every one that does, he prunes so as to bear more fruit. You are already pruned because of the word that I spoke to you. Remain in me as I remain in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. People will gather them and throw them into a fire, and they will be burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want, it will be done for you. By this has my Father been glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Just about 2 weeks ago, there was this long-awaited outdoor gardening project that took place around the Curie of Ars campus, mostly in the area of the Mercy Garden, which is just to the east of here. When that beautiful space was created by Father Charles about a decade ago, he had scores and scores of Leland cypress trees planted all over the place, but especially around the garden. Since then, they've grown to over 30 feet, and that's too high to reach for ordinary trimming. So they've never been topped off before. So they grew so tall that it appeared as if there were new trees growing on top of the existing trees above the lower areas that were reachable for trimming. So it was suggested that for the sake of the future health and safety of the trees, that they be given a haircut of sorts. So about 10 feet was trimmed off the top of each of the trees so that a bad wind gust or a heavy snowstorm wouldn't topple one or two of them and then throw off the whole symmetry of the garden. It was a big project, and it took about 3 days to do it. From a spiritual point of view, Jesus is suggesting something similar for us. He is suggesting the ongoing necessity of, you might say, a haircut, a pruning, a trimming of our lives in order to stay safe and healthy and holy as his disciples, so that we can bear much fruit to live the life of the gospel. So the gospel that we just heard, unfortunately, only comes up once every 3 years on a Sunday. It's a beautiful passage, but it's also a really challenging meditation by Jesus that I think we need to hear fairly often, more than once every 3 years. So we just heard Jesus say that his Father is the gardener. He is the vine grower. And so in saying this, Jesus isn't saying that God is this nice old guy in a straw hat with a sort of a blunt instrument, a hoe in his hand. He's telling us that God has very sharp eyes, and he's got a knife in his hand. God prunes, God cuts away. He says, every barren branch of mine, the Father cuts away, and even the fruit-bearing branch, he trims clean in order to make it more fruitful, to last. So Jesus is talking about periodic and, at some points, drastic measures. God and the knife. God is the tree trimmer. And the fact is, if we claim the privilege and the title of Christian, then we stand right smack in the path of those keen eyes and that sharp knife. Jesus is the real vine, the true vine, and we are the branches. But branches, obviously, have an obligation to be fruitful if they're going to remain connected to the tree, to the vine, and not become firewood. So Jesus is saying that we have to be productive in our spiritual life. And sometimes when we don't produce, we can be separated from our claimed relationship to the vine. And even when we think we are being useful, even when we assume we're being productive in our respective vocations, well, along comes some situation, some knife that challenges us, that causes us to change and grow, and hopefully, even through the pruning process, to become better. Because we're not always as spiritually mature as we think we might be or need to be. So the gardener's task is to prune back the potentially productive, immature branches in order to increase the productivity. So people who know things about gardening, you know that the vine isn't allowed to produce fruit for the first few years. It's cut the first year, and it's cut back again another year, and it's cut back again, and then the opportunity for it to produce is given. So the Christian life is also, by analogy, like that. We have our growing pains, ups and downs, fits and starts. That's intrinsic to our existence as disciples of the Lord. Sometimes we get separated, and the Lord is calling us to be engrafted back to Him, to stay close to Him. What God expects of us is always evolving based on the circumstances that we face in any particular moment of our lives. So the vine grower, the gardener, the maker of heaven and earth, knows all too well how we're doing, how connected we are, or how disconnected we might be at any particular moment from the vine. Sometimes we might not be abiding as closely as we could and should to Jesus, especially at those times when we slack off on our spiritual life and neglect our prayer life and think that we can do without the strong life that flows from clinging to the vine, clinging to Jesus. Each of us knows exactly what areas, or we should know what dimensions of our lives perhaps needs to be cut back or maybe eliminated altogether. Our selfishness, our addictions, our possessions, our self-indulgences at times, whatever it might be. What is it that God has to use the knife on in order for us to grow and become more attached to Jesus, the true vine? So we know, as people of faith, that Jesus is praying through us in the pruning process, the cutting back, the cutting down to right side, until, in the words of St. Paul, we come to full stature in Christ. So today's gospel, when you think about it, seems pretty harmless and simple at first, but there's no way that the sting can be taken out of what Jesus is saying. Maybe that's why we only hear this passage once every 3 years at Mass. Jesus portrays himself as the true vine and God as the gardener, with keen eyes and a sharp knife and very intentional. He leaves no room for anesthesia during the trimming process. It can be for our own good so that we remain and abide in him, where we will bear more fruit, much fruit for the life of the world. That's what this gospel reminds us today. And that brings me to you, the families of the second graders who are about to receive First Communion today. So Michael and Mario and Vanessa and Kiara and Isabella and Victoria and Jillian and Mia and Julia and Nicholas, each of you are assigned to us, of Jesus' presence in your life and in our lives. So the 10 of you, your parents happen to choose this particular Sunday with this particular gospel. So Mrs. Safanti is going to give each of your families, a little souvenir, you might say, and it's a souvenir of some of the gardening work that was done a couple of weeks ago here at Cure. So Mrs. Infante is passing these out. And so this is one of the branches that was cut from the tree 2 weeks ago. It looks like it's still doing pretty good. But if you look carefully at it, it's starting to turn brown, and some of the twigs are falling off of it. And sooner or later, this branch, because it's no longer connected to the tree, to the vine, this branch is going to wither away, and there'll be not much to it. Right now, it looks okay, and sometimes we can get by for a while, for a good amount of time, not necessarily as connected to Jesus as we should, but sooner or later it catches up to us. And that's why it's so important every year in every parish that we make a big deal out of First Communion, because each of you are reminding us how important it is to stay close to Jesus, to stay connected to Jesus, the true vine, just as a branch needs to stay on to a tree. And so when we get disconnected, it's when all sorts of problems can arise. So you're receiving First Communion today. Maybe you can take this home and put it in the kitchen somewhere. And it might be a reminder to say when it starts to get brighter, am I coming back to receive communion? Am I coming back to church? Am I keeping close to Jesus in my prayer life and with my family? That's what it's all about. And that's why each of you, the 10 of you here today, are reminding all of us to stay close to Jesus the vine, because it's very easy to get distracted, disconnected, and drift away from the Lord. So all of us as a parish family are looking to you guys, congratulating you on this beautiful day. Hopefully it will be a day that you always remember, and a day that reminds your families and everybody here to stay close to Jesus, the true vine. Let us now stand and profess the faith of Jesus that brings us here.